If the master of the house had known the hour when the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. This happened to me on Friday night. I promised my nephews a fun day on Friday, so we went to the zoo in the morning, took a nap to recharge, which was my favorite part of the day, and then we went to play mini golf in the evening. It was a fun day, but I was exhausted, and so as soon as I got back to the rectory Friday night, I set the security alarm and I went to bed. About an hour later, the alarm went off, and I was caught off guard. What's happening? Is someone really trying to break in? Is the system just malfunctioning? Do I go out there and see? Do I let the police come? All these thoughts were going through my mind. And just as I was about to press the notification on my phone for the police to come because I had no idea what was happening, I received a text from Father Butner. It said, "I set the alarm off in the rectory. How do I disable it?" After seminarian Doug had moved out on Tuesday, Father Butner said he would begin moving in, but we didn't discuss any of the details. And he wasn't there when I got home on Friday night, and it didn't look like anyone had moved in. So in any case, once my heart attack ceased, I was relieved. I went out there, I shut off the alarm, I let him in, and I went back to bed. In today's gospel, according to Luke, Jesus tells us you must also be prepared. That's a great image of being aware and prepared for the unexpected. For at an unknown hour, Jesus tells us, the Son of Man will come. He's talking about his coming at the end of time, but also his coming at the end of our lives in death, and really his coming we can think of in the here and now in word and sacrament. Now in our day, it's very hard to be vigilant. It's very hard to be prepared for anything that is not about to happen immediately. Because we have things like AI, we have things like iPhones, and we can get pretty much anything and everything we want in a moment. The other day I was using AI and I thought of a quote, but I couldn't remember the whole thing. I typed a few words in and there it came up immediately. So it's hard for us to be patient. It's hard for us to slow down. And sometimes it seems impossible to remain vigilant as Jesus calls us to be, or watchful or always prepared for anything that's far off, let alone something like the coming of the Lord at the end of time. So how do we remain in this state of vigilance, in this state of preparation for the coming of the Lord so that we're not caught off guard? First, let's go back for a moment to the readings that we heard, our first and second reading, because they give us some really important insights into this idea of vigilance and preparation. Our first reading is from the Book of Wisdom, and it's a little ethereal, as you heard it today, but it's talking about the Passover. Remember, God delivered his people from slavery in Egypt. That was the Passover. And imagine how you would feel if you were part of that event. You were told, you're no longer going to be slaves. You're going off to freedom. So you would say, that's awesome, let's do it. I'm ready to go right now at this moment. But it took some time for that to be realized. And in fact, the night before it happened, the Israelites had to remain up all night. They had to be vigilant. They had to be watching and waiting. And they had to be prepared for their entrance into the Promised Land. And that took them 40 years. 40 years to be prepared to enter the Promised Land as they wandered through the desert and as God was purifying them and making them ready for this great gift of true freedom in him. In our second reading today, we heard from the letter to the Hebrews, and we heard the same thing, this time with Abraham. So now after the Passover, Abraham was promised by God descendants and land and to be a worldwide blessing, but it took a while for this to happen. And those with him who were part of this promise, those with him and he himself, they had to remain vigilant and prepared, which means they had to be focused beyond this life, and they had to be focused on God himself, because those promises that God made, some of them were not fulfilled until the very ends of their lives. Some of them just began to be fulfilled as they were dying. Both the Israelites at the Passover and Abraham and the great saints of the Old Testament with him, these folks in these readings teach us three ways to be vigilant and prepared for the coming of the Lord, whether it's his coming here and now, or his coming at the hour of our death, or his coming on the last day. So here we go. The first way to be vigilant and prepared is by entering deeply into the offering of the Eucharist that we offer each time we gather as Christ's body, the church. On the night of the Passover, in that first reading, the Israelites were up all night remaining vigilant, and what were they doing? They were worshiping. They were engaged in a ritual offering, the Passover meal, that ritual offering that was preparing them for this freedom. The Eucharist is our new Passover, so to speak. When we gather and prepare, when we listen and respond, when we offer and receive, when we go and proclaim, we are remaining watchful for the coming of the Lord, who comes to us in the here and now at that altar and nourishes us with the gift of himself through this ritual meal. So the first way to be vigilant is to enter deeply into the offering of the Eucharist. Second, as the Israelites wandered in the desert for those 40 years, God was trying to turn them away from a whole old way of life that was marked by idol worship and multiple gods and human sacrifice and a whole bunch of other horrible things that were very crazy. And that's why it took so long for them to sort of get out of that. And they were turning toward a new way of life in the Promised Land. This idea of turning from an old way of life to a new way of life, that happened for each of us here at our baptism. But temptation and sin continue, and they keep us, leading us back to that old way of life. So our purification now takes place when we go to confession regularly. It helps us always to be prepared for the coming of the Lord spiritually. We always get rid of that baggage that's there, and we always keep turning back toward him. So there's the second way, regular confession. And finally, the third way to be vigilant and prepared for the coming of the Lord is detachment. In that second reading, Abraham and the great saints of the Old Testament were said to have lived in faith and hope. Two beautiful virtues, faith and hope, meaning they were detached from the things of this world. They had them, they used them, they enjoyed them, but they didn't live as if this is all there is. And we too must order our lives in this way, to be detached, because that detachment helps us to then focus on the life beyond and on living in God himself. So, the Eucharist, confession, and detachment. Let's pray today for the grace we need at this Eucharist to always be vigilant and prepared for when the Lord comes. And not in a fearful way either, that is afraid of that day, but in a way that joyfully seeks to run out and meet him when he comes, to allow him to greet us and to welcome us into the place that he has prepared for us from the beginning for all eternity.